Hello, curious viewers. Get ready for a fascinating and somewhat terrifying journey into the future of our planet. Today, we'll dive into a scenario that seems straight out of a sci-fi movie, but is actually closer to reality than we might think. Let's explore together. How will Earth change if all the ice melts? Imagine for a moment the constant sound of water dripping, echoing across the planet. Ancient glaciers disappearing before our eyes. The polar ice caps, once majestic, reduced to mere memories. This isn't the plot of a Hollywood blockbuster, but a possible future for our blue home. But before we dive into this transformed world, let's understand some intriguing numbers. Did you know that about 10% of the Earth's surface is currently covered by ice? This includes the vast expanses of Antarctica, the majestic Greenland, and countless glaciers spread across the globe. All this ice contains approximately 69% of the planet's freshwater. Sounds like a lot, right? But what would happen if all that ice simply disappeared? Let's start our journey with the most obvious and dramatic impact: sea level rise. If all of Earth's ice melted, the oceans would rise by about 230 feet. 230 feet! Try to visualize that for a moment. Coastal cities that today house millions of people would simply disappear beneath the waves. New York, Tokyo, Rio de Janeiro, Mumbai, all submerged. But the numbers become even more striking when we consider the affected population. Currently, about 40% of the world's population lives within 60 miles of the coast. We're talking over 3 billion people who would have to relocate, creating the largest mass migration in human history. Can you imagine the chaos? The tensions, the logistical and humanitarian challenges? And it's not just coastal areas that would be affected. Entire inland regions would undergo dramatic transformations. The melting of mountain glaciers would completely alter river flows, affecting fresh water supplies for billions of people. Places that today rely on seasonal meltwater for agriculture and hydroelectric energy would face unprecedented crises. But here's a surprising fact. Not all places would be submerged. Some regions, like Scandinavia and Canada, would actually rise. This is because these areas are currently weighed down by massive ice sheets. As the ice melts, they would start to bounce back in a process called isostatic adjustment. It's as if the Earth is breathing, adjusting to its new reality. Now, let's talk about something truly mysterious: the unpredictable climate changes this scenario would trigger. The massive ice melt would release huge amounts of methane and carbon dioxide trapped for millennia. These greenhouse gases could further accelerate global warming, creating a vicious cycle of unpredictable consequences. And here's something to give you chills: melting permafrost wouldn't just release gases. Scientists have found viruses and bacteria preserved in the ice for thousands of years. Some of them could be completely unknown to modern science. What would happen if these prehistoric microbes were suddenly released into a world unprepared for them? But it's not all bad news in this apocalyptic scenario. Paradoxically, the melting of Arctic ice would open up new shipping routes. The legendary Northwest Passage, a dream of explorers for centuries, would become a year-round navigable reality. This could revolutionize global trade, drastically shortening distances between Europe, Asia, and North America. Speaking of trade, let's take a look at how the global economy would be affected. Entire industries would have to reinvent themselves. Tourism, for instance, would see popular destinations like the Maldives and Venice simply disappear. On the other hand, new opportunities would arise. Imagine floating resorts where cities once stood, or diving expeditions to explore the submerged ruins of ancient metropolises. Agriculture would also undergo a revolution. Regions that are currently frozen and uninhabitable, like parts of Siberia and northern Canada, could become the world's new breadbasket. Meanwhile, areas that are fertile today might turn into deserts. Food production would have to quickly adapt to this new global geography. But what about wildlife? The changes would be catastrophic for many species. Polar bears, penguins, and seals would see their habitats completely disappear. The mass migration of animals would create new ecosystems in unexpected places. Imagine whales swimming over what was once Times Square in New York. A fascinating and rarely discussed aspect of this scenario is the impact on Earth's rotation. The massive redistribution of water would slightly shift the planet's axis. While the change would be too small to notice day to day, it could have subtle effects on seasons and global weather patterns. And here's something to make your mind wander. With the rising sea levels, pressure on the Earth's crust would significantly increase. This could lead to a spike in volcanic and seismic activity in some regions. Imagine a world not just flooded, but also trembling and erupting with new geological life. Now, let's talk about time. How long would it take for all this ice to melt? Well, that depends on several factors, but most scientists agree that even in the most pessimistic global warming scenarios, it would take centuries for all of the planet's ice to melt. However, the effects would start to be felt much sooner. Every inch of sea level rise already has significant impacts on coastal communities around the world. One intriguing aspect of this scenario is how it would affect our archaeological discoveries. Many important archaeological sites are located in low-lying coastal areas. The rising seas could submerge these historical treasures, making them inaccessible. On the other hand, retreating mountain glaciers are revealing artifacts and human remains preserved in ice for thousands of years. It's as if the planet is handing us long-hidden secrets, even as it threatens to swallow others. And speaking of revealed secrets, there are fascinating theories about what we might discover beneath Antarctica's ice. Some speculate about the existence of ancient civilizations or even alien technologies hidden beneath the ice sheet. While this sounds like pure science fiction, the fact is that we know surprisingly little about what lies beneath our planet's vast ice expanses. But let's return to reality for a moment. What would everyday life be like in this transformed world? The surviving cities would have to adapt drastically. Imagine Venice on a global scale, with buildings on stilts, canals replacing streets, and boats as the primary mode of urban transportation. Architecture and urban planning would undergo a complete revolution. Energy production would also change radically. Many nuclear and thermal power plants, often located near water sources for cooling, would need to be relocated or abandoned. On the other hand, the potential for tidal and wave energy would increase significantly. We could see floating energy farms becoming a common sight on the expanded seas. A fascinating and rarely discussed aspect is how this change would affect our collective psychology. How would humanity cope with the loss of historical and cultural landmarks? How would our relationship with nature and the environment change? We might see the emergence of new spiritual or philosophical movements in response to this dramatic transformation of our world. And here's something to make you think. With so much water available, could we see the rise of new life forms adapted to this expanded aquatic environment? Evolution is a slow process, but in such a dramatically altered world, who knows what surprising creatures might emerge over millennia? Speaking of life, one of the biggest concerns in this scenario would be the spread of diseases. With mass population displacement and changing ecosystems, we could see the resurgence of long-forgotten diseases or the emergence of new pathogens. Public health would become an even greater challenge in a constantly shifting world. But not everything would be catastrophic. This new world could offer unique opportunities for science and exploration. Imagine underwater expeditions to study submerged cities or the chance to explore areas of Antarctica and Greenland that have been covered in ice for millions of years. We could make revolutionary discoveries about the history of our planet and life on Earth. And here's an intriguing idea. With so much water available, could we see the rise of large-scale aquatic farming? Floating farms could become common, producing food in ways that seem like science fiction today. Aquaculture might become the main source of protein for the global population. Another fascinating aspect to consider is how this change would affect our political boundaries. With entire countries potentially disappearing and new lands emerging, how would the world's political map be redrawn? We might see the rise of new nations or alliances based on this new geography. And speaking of politics, how would the new maritime areas be governed? We could see the emergence of floating city-states operating outside the traditional jurisdiction of countries. Laws and regulations would have to evolve quickly to deal with this new global scenario. But let's return for a moment to the individual scale. What would it be like to grow up in this new world? Children born after this transformation would have a completely different perception of what is normal. For them, submerged cities and floating communities would simply be reality, not a sci-fi dystopia. And here's something to stimulate your imagination. With so much water available, could we see a resurgence of deep-sea exploration? Perhaps, ironically, the flooding of much of the Earth's surface would lead us to explore the oceans more deeply, discovering new life forms and resources that are currently out of reach. Speaking of resources, how would the mining industry adapt? With many terrestrial mines submerged, we might see a dramatic increase in underwater mining. This would bring new challenges and opportunities, along with entirely new environmental concerns. A curious aspect to consider is how this change would affect our traditions and culture. Many holidays and celebrations are tied to specific seasons or weather conditions. How would these traditions evolve in such a dramatically altered world? We might see the emergence of new festivals related to tidal changes or the cycles of a more aquatic planet. And speaking of culture, how would art and literature respond to this new reality? We might see the emergence of new literary genres or artistic movements inspired by this transformed world. Perhaps a new form of aquatic art that uses ocean currents as a medium of expression. In conclusion, while the idea of all the ice melting is a terrifying thought, it's also a scenario full of opportunities and new realities. Humanity has always adapted to challenges, and this would be no different. But to avoid such a drastic change, we must act now to preserve our planet's fragile balance. And that, dear viewers, is the big picture of what could happen if all the ice on Earth melted. A scenario filled with challenges, surprises, and, perhaps, new beginnings. But the most important question is, will we act in time to prevent this? Let's hope so. If you enjoyed this exploration of a possible future, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to stay tuned for more intriguing topics. See you in the next video.